Out tonight. As usual, it's great to see so many faces. I'll do a show of hands. Do we have anyone who's new today? Never been to one of me? Oh, actually, that's a lot. Wonderful. This is strictly voluntary, but if anyone is interested in just standing up and just letting us know why you're interested and what you're interested in working for, it'd be good to hear from you. Don't have to if you're not interested.
Early in the evening.
How about everything on
Oh yeah, yes. Hello.
So this week's news is what brought me here. Yes.
Wait, was there anything in the news this week?
Yeah, there were a few things.
A couple.
And I've been meaning to get here, and so I'm really sorry it took what it's taken to put fire under my bed.
And what's your name?
I'm sorry, I'm Janelle Snyder.
Janelle.
You're welcome, Janelle.
Good to meet you, Janelle. Nate. Anybody else interested? Or, yeah.
Hi, I'm Steve, and I just moved to Sacramento. But I'm here for the subject matter. I flew down to the border.
Oh.
Taking some actions, and so I
Great.
just wanted to hear, to stay on top of what's happening.
I think I just saw today some posted something online how there was a protest that blocked the roads next to the ice facility in San Diego. So there's a lot going on down there. So well, welcome to everybody who's new and everybody who's been here before and everybody who's been here every single time. Thank you so much. Since there has been, as Janelle mentioned, so much crazy and scary news lately, I thought I would focus on some positive things that have happened. First of all, the last weekend of June, we had a postcard party. We've been doing these from time to time. Some folks have been hosting them at their houses, and we've had a couple at public locations. This one was at a library in the Pocket neighborhood. I was expecting about 20 people to show up. There were so many people, we ran out of chairs. We had 40 people there. Any guesses? And they were all writing postcards to voters in District 10, which is just to the south of us, a very close congressional election going on there. Any guesses how many postcards we got done?
1,000.
More than 1,000. It was 1,200.
Wow.
So, and I think we've done, yes.
And the project, 5,400 postcards is finished. We have done all of those.
Over 5,000 postcards, she said, for anyone who didn't catch it. Over 5,000. Wonderful. We also we had an event at Senator Harris's office last week. Even though it was during a weekday, it was obviously not incredibly easy for too many people to get out there. But we had a couple dozen people who did make it. We met with a member of Senator Harris's staff and talked to her about the Supreme Court justice confirmation process. In case anyone's wondering, we're against Justice Kavanaugh. We're against it. Just to clear that up right now. We didn't take an official vote on that, but I just kind of assumed that. So everyone got to talk about. A lot of people had very personal stories to share, and it was really good. We had a big group, so we couldn't fit in their office. We had to stand out in the hallway. It was a good experience, and the staff member we spoke to, her name is Annalie. She told us that Senator Harris considers this not just an important issue, but like a hallmark kind of issue. This is something that she's going to pull out all the stops for, and whatever procedural tools she has or anything like that, she's going to use them to fight.
She feel confident?
What's that?
Does she feel confident?
She didn't say that. I don't know, but Indivisible does have a strategy on this. The strategy is get to 51 no votes and then win back the Senate. So the 51 no votes, we make sure that our senators are locked down. They are, and then we make calls for all the senators in Senate elections in Tennessee and Texas and Arizona and Nevada and everywhere else that they're going to have elections this fall. We're going to be doing that.
When you say that they're all locked down, are you including like Joe Manchin and?
No. I mean, our two senators
Oh,
here in
just in our
California
state.
have
I
both
thought you meant
publicly,
all the-
yeah.
Okay.
No, it's going to be a long process.
Yeah.
My guess is just personally, my guess is that some of the moderate Dems are not going to say anything until the very end, just in case something happens and it makes the decision easier. But, Jill.
Just to follow on that, I just want to reiterate something I posted on the Invisible's Facebook page today. A webinar I was on today, put on by Lawyers for Good Government. Just really emphasize, I mean, my fear about this in the sense of inevitability of doom, you know, strategy was completely consistent with Indivisible. Call your senators, even the good ones, stay on top of them every day. Call and say you have their back. Call and make specific demands, and I know Indivisible shares information about that, and I put up one on there today saying demand that all of Kavanaugh's records be released. That will slow the process down, and it will be filled with substantive stuff that is important and that we can use. And just, you know, just don't give up. Just don't give up before we're done with this.
That last line is about our strategy in a nutshell, right? Don't give up. Don't give up until we're done with this. Thank you. And speaking of Senator Harris, some more good news is she and a couple other Democratic senators introduced a bill just yesterday, I believe. It's called the Reunite Bill, or the Reunite Act, and that deals very closely with the subject we're talking about tonight, immigration. It would require the administration to immediately reunite the families that have been separated. So if you got some time tomorrow, please call Senator Harris's office and thank her for introducing that bill. Finally, two opportunities that I recently learned about that Indivisible, the national organization, is a part of. One is called the 100 Days Out Phone Bank. I just heard about this today. They, next weekend, I want to say next Saturday, is 100 days before the midterm elections, and Indivisible is marking the occasion by doing a massive phone banking campaign across the nation. If there's some interest, we could see about doing a public location and having people phone bank together, but it's actually designed for people to be able to do this at home. You just need a computer and a phone, and I admit that phone banking is a little bit confusing if you've never done it before, but after you get about 2 or 3 calls, you're an old pro at it and you can do it all day. And we were just talking to someone earlier before the meeting started that the hit rate is not very high. You can make 10 calls and maybe 1 or 2 will answer, but with the way they have the tool set up now, you can make hundreds of calls in just a few minutes, and it's a way to reach voters, and it's something that we can do if we're interested in fighting for the midterm elections, especially some of these Senate races that are going to be so important for future court confirmations and confirmations of all kinds. So we'll be posting some more info about that and putting it in our newsletter, posting it on Facebook. The 100 Days Out campaign, and if you just Google Indivisible 100 Days Out, I think you should be able to find it, or they probably even have it on the indivisible.org website. 100 Days Out. Yes.
Will you have a list of numbers for us to call?
They will provide. So what the way they do it, and they actually have a webinar training next Sunday morning. So you can go online. I think it's like Sunday at 10, and they'll have a webinar to show you how to do it. But what it does is you log onto the website, the phone banking website, and then you just have your phone ready and put your phone number in there and some other information, and they will call you. Like a machine calls you. You just answer the phone, and then a call script appears on the screen that you just read out and questions to ask and everything. And the computer takes care of dialing the numbers for you. You don't have to dial anything. You just hold the phone up to your ear. It'll tell you it's dialing, and it'll tell you when someone connects. So it's a little counterintuitive. It takes about 2 calls to get used to it, and then you figure out how to do it.
Is this one where we can, in other districts, call, we're just calling people to get them out for the midterms, right? This isn't one where we can
Right.
call and get people to call their senators.
I'm pretty sure they're going to have a campaign like that for the Supreme Court confirmation, where you would call, say, someone in Alaska and tell them to call Lisa Murkowski, or someone in Maine and tell them to call Susan Collins to vote
And you
no
can
on
actually
Kavanaugh.
connect them. They had it before where you
Yeah.
call them and you say, you want to talk to your senator? They say, yeah, you press a button and they're connected.
Yeah, so they did that last year with the ACA,
Yeah.
and I heard a rumor that they're going to do that again this year.
Yeah.
I assume it might be once the hearings actually start, but I don't know. As soon as I do hear anything about that, that will absolutely be on our website, and it'll be on our Facebook site and in our newsletter. And the last thing I heard about is another thing I heard about just today. Indivisible and Swing Left and Move On and a whole laundry list of other progressive organizations are joining forces for something they call The Last Weekend. Basically, right now, all it is a page where you sign up and say, I would like to volunteer the last weekend before the election. They're coordinating efforts so that we don't have a bunch of groups working against each other. But people are going to volunteer to reach out to voters in the Saturday and Sunday before the election, because that's when your contact with voters is most likely to matter. So if you talk to someone 2 days before the election and get them to say I will vote, they're a lot more likely to get out and vote. So it's called The Last Weekend, and if you go on the site, I think it's just thelastweekend.org.
It's on the website.
You got it. Okay, Alan is way ahead of me as usual. So it's on Indivisible Sacramento's website too if you can't find it. So, all right, and that's all that I will. That's all the time I'm going to take up talking, because I know you all came here to see our guest tonight. She's a very distinguished guest. She is the co-director of the UC Davis Immigration Law Clinic, and she is the the counsel of record for the case Flores versus Sessions. Please welcome Holly Cooper.
Sorry. So, thank you. I just wanted to say that I came here tonight, and we're super busy, but Indivisible has been such an enormous asset for our detained child clients for a number of years now. And just an illustration of that was that we represented a child who was detained in Woodland, California, in the immigration detention facility there. And they were holding him after he won his case. He won political asylum in this country, and they were refusing to release him. And I thought, well, this is crazy. He's got legal status, and he's 14 years old, but he had no family here. And I was sort of like, well, if I told him, like, well, if I have to put together a federal petition for you, it's going to take me a little while, right? It's a little bit of work. And he was a little restless, as a teenager would be, right? Teenage boy would be too. And I said, well, maybe, we can try alternative advocacy that doesn't include the courtroom. Because he's like, I don't have 2 weeks. I can't sit in this place another 2 weeks. And so I reached out to Indivisible, and you guys showed up in spades in front of the detention facility to demand his release. And he was released, I think, that day or the next day. And so I thank you. And also, it took about 40 hours of work off of my desk. You guys are way more effective than a courtroom. So always remember that. And every time I go into this day, there's been such, I think, a highlight of children in detention and families in detention.
Can you speak up?
Sure, I can speak up. Sorry. Never had that request. I'm usually too loud. I'm losing my voice a little bit. But there's been a lot of highlight in this country, I think, on the plight of children in detention. And I, as part of the Flores settlement agreement, I'm permitted to go into court or to any detention facility and talk to any child in the United States.
Really?
I show up and I can ask to see any child and speak to them and ask them questions. But what I always tell them is that, maybe I'll move up a little bit. There you go. Does that feel better? Is I always tell them that there's people in this in this country and internationally that support them, and I think that it's a complete change in that child's capacity to withstand detention when I tell him that there's people like yourselves that are protesting, that are demanding accountability. I think that the children really respond to it, and so they always tell me to say thank you to you guys, that you give them like fortitude to endure detention, which they shouldn't have to endure. But I think knowing that there's solidarity in this community and knowing there's people in this country that support them is a really good mental shift for the child to make them feel welcome. And so I thank you for that too, because a lot of you guys don't realize how important you are to the children who are in detention because you don't get to talk to them. But I do, and I always tell them about people like yourselves. And they are so thankful. In fact, so many of them have asked for protests, and they have specific requests for banners. And I'm like, okay, let me figure all this out. But really, thank you, because I think your work is so instrumental. And I also think that the work that you're doing, you may not feel this, but when we go into court, I've been doing this work for 20 years, representing detained children. And I've gone into court and I've beat my head against the wall. And judges weren't as receptive, but now judges are very receptive to very, very creative arguments. And a lot of that has to do with the turning tide of this country. In fact, in the San Diego case, that was not brought by me, but brought by the ACLU, a family separation class action lawsuit brought in San Diego, the judge mentioned the protesters and the media and the accountability and the calls that were being made. So you're making it into judges' decisions, right? So I always tell that to people because we can't do what we need to do, which is push the boundaries of the law and the Constitution in a way unless we have the public support. Because judges, even though they won't tell you this, they do care about what is happening in the streets. So with that, I can give a little bit of history of the Flores Settlement Agreement that I'm involved in, and answering if you have questions throughout, feel free. I don't want to talk for the whole time. But the Flores Settlement Agreement in the 80s, back when I was in high school, they brought a lawsuit on behalf of all detained children. The lead plaintiff was a girl. She was 16. She was being strip searched. She was being held in an adult sort of detention facility. And the lawyers got together and said, this is unacceptable. You know, children should have better conditions than being held in an old motel with concertina wire with strange adults. And they shouldn't be strip searched. They should have school. They should have the availability to get out. They should have some type of accountability to the system. And so they sued. What ended up resulting was years, over a decade of litigation that came to a contract between the children and the federal government. The children negotiated what's called a settlement agreement. And it was we want the federal government to do all of these different things. And one of which was, I want to be with my parents. I want to be with family. It was one of the big cruxes of the Flores Settlement Agreement, was the right for every child to reunify with parents, whether documented or not, in this country. And also to be held in an environment that's the least restrictive. In other words, you can't just throw them in a prison. You've got to put them in an environment that's a shelter care that's appropriate for a child. And they also have to be released expeditiously. You can't just hold them here. And they also have to be licensed. And the big issue is they have to be licensed. And what does that mean? And it means that they have to comply with state licensing requirements to care for children. They have to provide basic health care, education, things of that nature. And so the Trump administration has made it a priority to get rid of this settlement agreement that was negotiated in the 80s and 90s by children, a class of nationwide children, to have minimum, just really basic, I can't emphasize enough how basic and minimum the standards provided in the Flores Settlement Agreement are. But I, as the lawyer on behalf of this class, this settlement agreement, we can actually go into court when we feel like they're violating it and bring a motion in front of the court and say, they're violating this contract. And the children get to tell us, we get to go in and talk to hundreds of children and that, are they complying with this? Are they complying with that? And if the children say no, we can bring a motion to enforce and say, you're not living up to your end of the deal, which is what we've done, and we've won in every single case. And so the federal government doesn't like that. Maybe they do, I don't know. They have to pay us too. They have to pay when they lose. So anyway, the latest round was when Trump took office. Literally, one of his top priorities was to get rid of the Flores Settlement Agreement. And we were sort of like, okay, I guess we're on high alert. And then this summer, he actually made an executive order which mentioned the Flores Settlement Agreement and said, I want the Attorney General to move to modify this. And we got that modification request. And essentially what the Trump administration was asking was that they do away with the licensing provisions. Because what happens is, so Trump said, well, the reason I have to separate families is because of the Flores Settlement Agreement, which is sort of true in some ways. It's because, and the reason he says that is because children can only be held in adult prisons for 20 days when it's a period of an influx. And so once the 20 days is over, the child can no longer be in that adult prison and has to be moved to a shelter or licensed facility. So you hear a lot in the media that children can only be held for 20 days. That's not true. Children can be held indefinitely in a licensed facility, in a licensed detention facility. But they can only be held 20 days in an adult or non-licensed facility. Does that make sense? So there's a lot. So what Trump is saying was, he has the ability to make licensed family detention facilities. They just haven't done it. So they could, in theory, hold a child with a family member in a licensed facility, and it would comply with the Flores Settlement Agreement. But they've never built such facilities. So what he asked when he went to court, said, I want to do away with the Flores Settlement Agreement. This was about 2-3 weeks ago. I haven't slept, so it was all muddled in my brain. But sometime at the end of, I think it was June 21st, the Trump administration moved to modify and do away with the Flores Settlement Agreement, asking for family detention centers that don't have to meet licensing requirements. In other words, they don't have to provide basic education or basic health care, so children essentially could be held in an adult prison with their parents. That's what he was asking for. Yes?
Now, all of the millions of dollars that went to those organizations in Texas to create those detention centers, they're not certified then, correct? Are they certified centers?
So some of them are. So there are shelter care facilities that are licensed, and those are run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement. But the ones run by ICE are not. There's only one family licensed facility, and that's in Berks, Pennsylvania. I don't know where Berks, Pennsylvania is, but that's what it's called. But all the ones in Texas, the family detention centers, none of them are licensed. So children can only be kept there for 20 days, but there are child-only detention facilities that are licensed, but parents aren't allowed there, if that makes sense.
And why were they moved from Texas to New York, to Michigan, to Chicago?
The children?
Yeah.
So the children, when they were separated, because at the 20th day marker, right, the mom is in an adult detention facility, that child can only be with her for 20 days. And at that 20th day, then the child has to be moved to a detention facility that's licensed for children. And so those detention facilities, there's a map that Reveal did, and it shows you all the 200 detention facilities. They're all throughout the United States.
So it's like a lotto, they can just go anywhere.
Exactly. It's wherever there's capacity. Yeah.
So what did Obama and Bush and Clinton do in the same circumstance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, because I've been doing this for 20 years, I can answer that. Yeah, so what is the difference between the Trump administration and Obama administration?
Oh, don't even start.
We don't have enough time for that.
You know where you are.
Well, one of the things that I think is important is, generally speaking, when a mother or a father came here with a young child, there was a policy in favor of release. If a child came alone, the child was detained until they could have find like an adult. The difference is that Trump is and also Obama didn't prosecute parents with young children. And they had most parents who came with young children were released together after 20 days. They did an asylum screening. If they passed it, they were generally released together. The difference now is mom or dad is being prosecuted for illegal entry. They're being separated from the child, and then they're not being released. So is that a good answer?
They weren't
Yes.
deported, they were just released.
Well, then they had to fight their case. They had to fight their deportation
ankle
case.
bracelet?
Yeah, some of them, yes, some of them had the
Stayed in
ankle
the United
bracelets. Yeah, I don't know how much detail you want, but they were released, but yes, with supervision.
Whatever happened to the nursing babies? I mean, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, you don't take a nursing baby.
Yeah.
Where did they put, what happened, did anybody trace that?
Yeah, the information that we're getting is somewhere a little over 2,000 children were separated from their parents since the zero tolerance policy. I think it's like
Right.
2,300. And of those, I think, don't quote me on this, but it's like 200 to 300 of those were under 5.
Right.
And so where are all of they? Well, the government lawyer has said this on the record, in case someone's paper putting that they don't know. They destroyed a lot of the records when the children arrived together. So now they're doing DNA testing to figure out who's who. And some parents were deported, and so they're trying to find the parent. And it's a mess. I mean, I think even the federal government will agree that it is a mess. And some of the reunifications are happening. And as you know, the San Diego ACLU case called Miss L, the court gave them like a very short time period to reunite children 5 and under, and then gave them 30 days to reunite children over 5 with their family, like 30 days. So the implementation of that has been a mess.
Yeah.
They didn't meet the first
Right.
deadline. and it's still being implemented. And so it's a great question. So I mean,
What are the
some
consequences?
Right, right.
the consequences. I mean, if you don't comply with a court order, you can be sanctioned.
Who? Who's
The
gonna be
federal
sanctioned?
government.
Yeah.
They
What
can be
does
put
that
into
mean?
jail. But I mean, I haven't seen that happen yet. You know, I've never seen the federal government
Put in jail.
put in jail. But,
I mean,
Yeah,
would they
at
go
least-
after individuals?
yeah, yeah.
Have you talked to a lot of the children and how do you find them?
Yeah, so I've talked to, at least since this Trump administration, I mean, I've talked to thousands of children throughout my career. But we monitor the Flores settlement agreements, so probably in the last 6 months, I've probably talked to 100+ children. And then our other team has talked to, I think they just submitted a filing in Flores with 200 children's declarations, asking for a special court monitor because it's so bad on the border. How do we find them? So the way the Office of Refugee Resettlement is the entity that detains children, and they have 5 different levels of detention. The bottom level is, the least secure is shelter. Most of the children, the conditions there are okay. The trauma that they're experiencing is the trauma of familial separation or just the trauma of detention. So, and you can't, it's nice, because sometimes it's really hard because you see people come and do a tour of the facility, and they're like, well, this is nice. And you're like, yeah, well, it's nice, but would you want to put your kid in a camp for 6 months at 5 years old, right? So you have to also kind of digest the fact that this is detention, they're not with their family, and there's just that ongoing, anxiety and angst. And every child feels that. And then you get to the highest level of secure detention, which is a juvenile jail. And there's 3 of those in the United States that ORR uses, and one of them is in Woodland, where I live, which is about 25 miles from here. And that's like a jail, where kids are kept in a jail. If you talk to any kid there, they are miserable. They don't like the conditions. And a lot of the children, and I think it's important to remember that only 20% of the children in our immigration detention system come here with family, or with parents. The other 80% come here alone or with siblings. And so we can't really forget about those kids because they're a real important presence. And so most of the kids we see in the higher level facilities are former street kids, kids with no one. I've talked to kids last week that still had bullet wounds. They escaped. They were still lodged in their arms. They have machete wounds. I mean, these kids are some of the most highly traumatized kids that you'll ever meet. We've talked to kids that have had psychotic breakdowns because they've been separated from their parents. They've even been institutionalized. And we've seen some forcible sedation cases. So, the conditions really vary on that spectrum of the facility itself. But one thing that's universally true is the kids don't want to be detained. I've never met a kid that was like, I want to stay here. And then the conditions, are just a mixed bag of some facilities, the one in Virginia, sometimes hoods kids for disciplinary, puts them in restraint chairs. So some of the declarations you can read online, you can Google this later, but the conditions are pretty bad for the highest level secure facilities. And then the lowest ones are generally, the conditions are good, it's just really I'm not with my mom. I'm not with who I want to be with, right? Summer camp is fun for a week, but after that, I want my parents, right?
Why are some kids put to a level 5 facility?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, who makes that choice?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, that's a great. I will repeat it. So he's like, what? Why would a child be put in a higher level of secure detention, like a level 5? And that's what we're exploring right now in our lawsuit. Is that so? Essentially, ORR, if a child tries to escape. Or a child can do something, that's not good, right? They could try and get in a fight with another kid. They could. Most of the times we see kids put in a higher level facility because they're trying to commit suicide. It's hard to talk about these things; they're tough to talk about. But that's one of the primary reasons: is suicide risk, escape risk, or they've gotten into some kind of a fight in the facility. So then they're put in these higher level secure detention facilities. Usually what you're seeing, and those are the most traumatized, they're usually boys. They're usually boys that have had a horrible life. Because I've met with, that's kind of the focus of my work, is working with these boys in these these high security facilities. When you read their stories, it's really traumatic. So I think one of our goals with our lawsuit is to get these kids the best mental health care that they can get. And so that's one of our strategies, but that's a really good question.
Can
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'll talk, somebody hasn't talked, and then, yeah.
You mentioned the suicide rate, and I heard briefly something about that earlier last week, and I was thinking more in terms of, they said a lot of parents who have been separated have committed suicide.
Yeah, I know of,
But you're saying that
Kids are.
this is a problem with some of the children as well?
absolutely.
Do you have
I mean, they're not
any
committing,
stats
like,
on that?
I haven't seen a child who's actually, sounds really
Fulfilled it?
graphic, who's actually committed suicide, but has attempted. Like I talked to a boy last week that had tried to hang himself when he was on the border region. Some kids, you know, have their arms are all cut up. Just something that's, you know, it's an issue, and I think a big part of it, or I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but what the kids are telling me is that it's just this. I don't know what I'm ever getting out, and this is the only control I have. And some of them are just really desperate because one kid came up and he just had witnessed his brother being macheted to death. And he came up here and he still had machete wounds. And so he's trying to kill himself. I mean, so is it the detention facility? Probably. Is it the trauma? You know, it's just like compounding traumas.
So do you have any statistics on how, I mean, that hadn't occurred to me before last week, and now you're saying something, and it's like, wait, so do you have any statistics on the parents who are committing suicide?
I don't. I only know of 3 cases in the last 3 months. I'm not trying to minimize it. I mean, that's a lot, right? But you know, I mean, suicide. I would say we probably. There was another man who was deported, and he committed suicide en route. I think he was being deported to Eritrea, and he committed suicide. I think somewhere in a ICE was transporting somewhere in Saudi Arabia, I believe. So we see it. Probably I see about 10 cases of adult suicide a year, more than that, and some more than that are attempts.
So, in relation to what's going on?
With family separation,
Yeah.
I'm only aware of one man, I think he was in Texas, that committed suicide after he was separated from his young son. But I'm aware of other cases. I don't know if they're family related, though, if that's your question. There was a case just 2 days ago of a person who hung themselves. I don't know that that was related to family suicide, or family separation. The suicide was related to family separation or not.
I don't think there's any required reporting of these facilities, at least because each of them, like Texas versus, you know, Florida or whatever. So it's really hard to get any statistics,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, ICE is supposed to
what you
report
hear.
the deaths, and they
Nobody
do.
tracks it.
But like whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. I don't know if we know. Yes, sir. And then I'll get to you. Yes, sir.
I actually have 2 questions. One is, the boy was in Woodland. What was the basis, the rationale of the federal government not releasing him? And 2, what are your statistics about where these children come from?
Like in terms of countries of origin?
Yes.
You know, I mean, generally speaking, some kids aren't released because they don't have family here in the United States. Or the federal government makes, a lot of the times family come forward and say, I want to come claim my son or my brother. And then the federal government sometimes can put conditions on it that are too hard for people to meet. Like I'm representing a girl who's deaf and she's trying to get out with her sister. And the federal government said, well, your sister has to show that she can, you know, she has a separate room for you, like a 3-bedroom home, and like she can afford $500 a month of medical care. And the sister is sort of like, well, I've got a young baby, and I don't know that I can meet all of these demands. So it can be a mixed reason. The family can't meet the demand, or the child just has no one here in this country, so he can't or she can't get out. And then the second part of your question was where are the children coming from? Primarily the children are coming from the 3 countries in Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We may see a little bit more from Nicaragua now that there's a little bit more civil unrest. Then we have just a mixed bag from China, from India, you know, from all over the world, you name it. And the Congo, you know, whatnot. I think the lead plaintiff in the ACLU's case in San Diego is from the Congo.
So as these cases move through the justice system and there's been such a huge reaction to the zero tolerance policy, what kind of remedies are you asking for? I mean, would a judge take the system into receivership? I mean, the judge.
Yeah, that's what we just asked.
So
we just asked that in the Florida case. So the hearing for that will be on July 27th. You're welcome to
away
come, LA. Maybe crowded in the courtroom.
Like, take this away from the feds, we own this now?
We just
Where
asked,
in LA, what date, and all
July 27th. So there's two pieces of Flores case that'll be heard that day. One is on that issue of whether the judge should put this into receivership or appoint a court monitor. You know, I mean, I think that's kind of what you're getting at, sort of. Yeah. I know. I'm sorry, but you know, it's a step closer to more monitoring. So that hearing will be in the Central District before Judge G, the Central District Federal Court building. Our case on the medication and the process of putting kids into these higher level security facilities will be at 10 a.m. And I think that the case of whether they're going to appoint a court monitor will be later in the afternoon. But I could check.
So is there anything the state of California could do?
Through the state law? Through state policy change?
State law or state policy? I mean,
Yeah.
they license facilities. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there is. And one of the things we've been trying to work on is after the explosion of media interest, we got an explosion of like, what can we do to help? And one of the things I think that we can do is, because of the state licensing requirements under the Flores settlement agreement, I believe that we can demand, one of our goals is to get better medical ethical standards inside the facilities, because a lot of the times when children are suicidal or they do have psychiatric needs, that is not kept confidential. It's actually put into their file for deportation, and it's used to their detriment. So what we're trying to do is to ask the state policymakers, and Physicians for Human Rights is now on board to assist with some of those policy changes. But one of the big policy pieces that I'd like to see is a confidentiality provision when a child does reach out for psychological or psychiatric services, so that it won't be used against them should they say something, prejudicial. Because a lot of these kids have come from tough places that they may, say, hey, I smoked marijuana once or whatever. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize it, but sometimes that can be used against them later on in their deportation case. So we're really hoping that children can get confidential psychiatric or psychological care that they need. And part of that could be a state legislative fix on talking about the ethics standards for detained children. And then the second question that we want answered is who should be making these medical decisions on behalf of the child? Because right now it's the federal government. It's saying that they're standing in loco parentis. But what we found is that they're not making, it's really a probation officer that's making the medical decisions for the children who's contracted with the federal government. So there are some state, maybe too much for the 10-minute soundbite, but that's some of the state policy fixes that I see are most immediately needed. And I think
Is there a bill to support?
not yet. We have Physicians for Human Rights who's going to build up a study and a report and hopefully release the report. The goal is to release it in January 2019. And then what we're hoping to do is to meet with state policymakers in different states, because kids are detained everywhere, right? And every state has different compositions of their legislatures. So as soon as we have that, our hope is to push this into a state policy change. Yeah, but yeah, I think that's because our real hope for most immigrants lies in the state, at least in California, rather than at least the federal legislature. I think you had a question.
Yeah, I did have a question. So, I know as they were saying, okay, we're releasing these children, but some of the folks that they're trying to be released to are not parents.
Mm-hmm.
So are they, because when I hear that, I think that's kind of sinister, because I'm thinking, oh, is it someone who's, sex trafficking these children?
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that probably it happens, but could it also be that they're just trying to release them to another family member and they're using that term, that they're not their parents? You know what I mean? They're spinning it as if, all these people these children that are not being released to people who were with them when they, were separated, are not their.
That does happen, for sure. I mean, traffickers have come in with children, and so there has to be some kind of vetting.
Yeah, sure,
of
I get
the fitness,
that, but that they're not, I don't know, I wondered about that when you said, it's relatives trying to get the kids, but they can't, and so I just wondered if that was, are they using that as, this whole group of people are not their parents, so they can't be released to them, but they're relatives, right?
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a tricky double-edged sword. Oh, okay, you're like. Yeah, so that's a great question. The question is if you have somebody that's not a parent, the Trump administration sometimes will suggest, well, we gotta be really careful here because this could be traffickers.
Right.
And on the other hand, there are situations where it's a legitimate family member. And so like, you know, but sometimes I agree with you, the Trump administration will use this sort of protective rhetoric to say, well, we can't release unless it's a parent, because it could be a trafficker. When really that's, in my experience, has been the minority of kids are at that risk, but you don't know, you never know.
You don't know. You know.
So, you know, we've given them the benefit of the doubt, but what we can come forward with is, usually what we'll try to get is the parent's signature in their home country to say that I agree that my child should be released to this adult individual. And then they do some vetting, they'll do a home study. If they believe a kid is at risk for trafficking, they will do a home study, but it can significantly delay the child's release if it's not the parent.
Right.
But it's sort of like a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I know. You
If
wanna,
you kind of push too fast and the kid gets released, it is a risky situation.
Yeah.
So as advocates, we kind of, you know, we want to be cautious, but we also want what's best for the kid. And if it is a
Right.
legitimate family member, it should happen pretty quickly. Yeah. And then I think there's all sorts of questions. You've been waiting for a while.
And my question keeps on changing in my mind. I hope it comes out now. But I was thinking, from the time, let's pretend that a family was able to stay together and they entered our country. How long are they in the process in some kind of facility before they are either granted asylum or deported? How long is it for them? How long do
So
they
if
wait?
you're detained and you're not released, you're expedited. And the answer to that question is it depends on how you entered. If you entered presenting yourself at a point of inspection and said, I'd like to apply for political asylum, then they parole you into the United States, or if you're caught entering, or if you're internally into the United States. Generally speaking, I'd say you're screened by an asylum officer, and that process takes about 20 days. If you pass the screening, then you're given a full hearing in front of an immigration judge, which can take another like 3 months. So it can take about 6 months before you get a final adjudication. Sometimes less. If you lose a pre-screening case, because Sessions made an opinion about a month ago that says domestic violence is no longer basis for political asylum. So we're seeing more and more women losing their asylum case at the pre-screening process. They only have a certain amount of days to appeal that to an immigration judge. And if they lose, they're out. So it could be really quick if you lose. If you win, you know, or pass that pre-screening, it can take a little bit longer. There's no real easy answer to that, but that's the best I can do. But generally speaking, I would say somewhere around 3 to 6 months to get a final adjudication on your case.
This sort of ties in with what Yvonne was asking you, because the biggest confusion I have, besides why Trump is president, is why are they allowed to arbitrarily keep changing what allows you to come into this country? Today it was what, gang affiliation is no longer allowed now.
Right.
And it's just, I don't understand how these people who've gone through all of this to try to get here can cope with just that.
Yeah.
Is that legal that they can keep changing it?
Well, that's that's kind of an administrative law question, which is a great question, because I think what you're getting at is because immigration courts are under the executive branch. They're not Article III courts, or they're not part of the judicial branch. So I don't know if you knew that.
I did know
But
that.
if now you know, and so when you're in an executive branch court, it's called like administrative law court. They can change the rules of the game on you and so Sessions can certify a case to himself and say, I can overrule any court, which is crazy, right? Yeah, it is crazy. But they're not supposed to be doing it arbitrarily and capriciously, which is I think of what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So this is legal, because it smells a lot like arbitrary. Because all of a sudden we have like decades of law that's been steadily built, and then it's ripped out, and sort of a decision that kind of spins out, you know, all this decades of precedent. So I think there will be challenges to that, and I think essentially they'll be making the argument that you're making, which is like, you can't just change the rules of the game after decades and decades of building blocks to get here. So we'll see if we win or not. But I won't be doing that case. Gina, sorry.
The Trump administration says that the reason that they have got this zero tolerance policy is because they want for people to not come, to decide that it's too much work and that they're going to be sent back anyway and not come. And then you've got civil unrest, and you've got problems that are in these Central American countries and other places where people are coming from. In your experience, is this stopping people from coming? this is a horrible thing to be doing, and I'm horrified by it. But is it working? Can the Trump administration at least say we've done what we said we wanted to do?
That's a really good question, and that was part of the Trump administration's filing that it made on January 21st, that like, that the Flores settlement agreement was actually compelling more migration. The Judge G, her decisions was creating an influx, which we readily beat, and Judge G did not agree. She said, there's no way, if you do like a statistical analysis of migration, you have a control group that's unaffected by Flores, and you look at their migratory patterns, and you look at a control group that is affected by Flores, there's no difference. But you know, your question is Trump's deterrence policy creating an actual deterrence? And in the last few months, we've seen a huge influx at the borders. And so I know, you know, and I think there was even I think it's a sociologist who blogs, and you know, he was calling it the Trump effect, where we saw diminishing numbers at the border for a while. But he's like saying, I have to withdraw my Trump effect theory because now we're starting to see the increase. So I don't think it is. And what sociologists who have studied this, and they're smarter with statistics than I would ever be, have, I think there's a really good blog on called Just Security, and it goes through all the statistical analysis of whether deterrence is actually working. And I think it's Alex Waxman, fantastic statistical analysis. And they pretty much show that there is no correlation. The only thing compelling migration, what they call the push factor, is the conditions in the country. Shock, right?
Yeah.
Shocker. People don't want to migrate. My clients generally tell me, I don't want to leave my home country, but you know, when you know it's unsafe, I'm going to do anything to get my children and myself out of there. Even children travel alone. So the biggest correlation of migration is the conditions in the home country.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. I know
Okay.
there are a ton of questions here.
Okay, I think there was some over here. Yes, sir.
How common is it for the U.S. to deport parents without the children that they came with? And what is the basis for that?
Yeah, you know, I've been doing this for a while, and it's pretty rare, but unfortunately it just became more common. And so it's devastating, because then it's, to get the child back, especially a tender age child, back to their home country is going to be very difficult, because you've got to get, anyway, it's a logistical nightmare. But yeah, I think I've been following a few of the cases where the parents have been deported in advance of the child. But part of the court order in San Diego did say that they had to even reunite the
Prior
parent.
to leaving.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
did.
So anyway, we hope that it'll no longer happen, absent the parental prerogative to say, oh, I want my child to, you know, stay here. And because sometimes children have separate rights, or a stronger case than an adult would. It sounds crazy. But sometimes I've represented children where I'm like, the parent has no asylum case, but the child is a great one. So there can be a different legal analysis for a parent and a child. But I always, you try to get the parental, assuming a parent is a good parent and has the child's best interest, you always try to ask the parent, what are their wishes for their child? Sometimes parents say, I want you to go forward with my child's case, and I'm just gonna get deported. And they'll, you know, that's the choice a parent has to make. But other times parents are like, look, I don't care what the home country is, I'm never leaving my child. And it's all legitimate decisions. I'm figuring the parent, as long as the parent has the child's best interests at heart, those are tough decisions to make them. Anybody else?
What can we do? I mean, I have the feeling that there's this facility in Woodland. Everybody in this room would get up and go there tomorrow if we thought that would help.
Yeah.
What would you tell us? What is
Well, it's funny because I talked to the kids there, and they were like, well, we want people to protest. And so I'm like, okay, well, you know, I can't be the one being like, they're never gonna let me in again. But
Come on, guys, let's go in.
but I'm trying to work with the lawyer who's representing them in the deportation case, because I'm just the Flores counsel, to see if that's something that, you know, we're trying to work, but there may be something that we're gonna do. And I'll let Regina and you guys know, because I know the kids said, because I told them, I was like, you know, there's this whole swell of, because I think it was a Saturday, when was that, on the 20th of June?
Yeah.
And I showed them pictures, and they were so excited, and they were like, why aren't they here? And I was like, well, they would be here like that if you give the green light. So, you know, I think every kid I've talked to would love it. You know, but they're like, well, are we gonna be able to hear them? And I'm like, I don't know, you know, so, but,
Somebody has to organize it, it sounds like.
yeah.
How many children are held there?
Yeah.
24.
Boys, we'll just go and sing for them outside.
Yeah, so I don't know, I mean,
Make a big one.
I'm not an activist or an organizer
Yeah.
like you guys are, but I know that, it's something that the kids were really excited about, whether or not, you know, but I think I was trying to organize with Indivisible YOLO, and told them that this is what the kids want, and they were trying to think through like the messaging and what would be the demands, and one of the kids told me his demands were, I want family, I want freedom, I want water, I want a blanket.
Oh, really?
And he wanted a banner with his name on it, but I don't know if I have the authority to release his name to you. But anyway, yeah, so, but it was interesting. I actually tweeted that out and it went like viral, and I think people really liked it. But I you know, I don't know, I'm not an organizer or an activist, but you probably would want to talk to Indivisible YOLO, because they have a long history working with that facility.
So are you saying these kids don't have a blanket?
Um,
Or they want a
he
special
said he
blanket?
had one blanket, but it wasn't sufficient, because they keep the rooms pretty cold there.
Yeah, I heard that.
But he didn't want water. He didn't feel like he had enough water. So I'm just giving you the kids' own words. But yeah.
Of the 24 children that are there, who is the longest one that's been detained? The longest.
Or what is the longest?
The longest I've ever seen would probably be somewhere around 3 years. That's not right now. That's not right now. He's not there right now. He's out. We got him out. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. The issue is they transfer kids around like 6 or 7 times. So
is that?
But I can find out.
Is that public record?
As far as council, we have access to
Yeah,
that.
because
They give us
you
monthly
have
reports.
to know what child has been there the longest to number of days.
Yeah, I would say right now probably the longest is 4 or 5 months there. But that's just me going off my memory, which is not.
But even throughout California.
Yeah, and I mean, but there's some kids that have been detained for very long times. Right now in YOLO, though, I don't think that there's any kid that's reaching, you know, over a year. But I'd have to go back and I could check the roster, because as Flores Council, they gave us a monthly report, and it has the date of arrival and immigration custody.
So has
And then
YOLO
they go to another
Indivisible
facility though
visited
sometimes,
this
right?
facility?
What? Sorry.
Has the Indivisible YOLO County, whatever, have they visited this facility?
Yeah,
Yes.
they have, and they've been really engaged, because there was a question of whether they should renew the contract. The county should renew the contract, because they actually contract with the federal government. And there was a big debate about whether they should terminate the contract or not. So there's been a lot of local action about it. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah,
to
yeah, I'll
interrupt
go.
you,
I'll stop.
but we probably are running out of time. It's almost 8 o'clock. But we will reach out to Indivisible YOLO and see what we can
And there are
coordinate
other
with.
groups, so you guys, I just wanna, there are other groups that have been very actively involved with that facility and are actually have some differences of opinion
Yeah.
about whether to, try to strive to have there be no more detention there, or whether that's a good and local place where they have access. So there's community engagement there, and we can try to hook up them, but we just wanna, there are people who take the lead, who have the lead. So I just wanna, give people that confidence and to say we can assist, but we don't have to feel like we're going where nobody is already doing work for years and years and years.
So I know there are so many questions, and I don't think we'll ever be able to get.
I have contacts in LA, so if I have specific time, courtroom, the whole thing, I can get a contingent of people there for you.
Okay.
So, I just need that information.
Yeah, I don't have, I mean, I know the court and I know the judge. What the
So
courtroom number is.
Give it to Nate.
Okay.
And he'll give it to me.
Regina.
I'll
Okay.
pass it on, or Regina will pass it. Okay. Thank you so much, Holly. And I would like to personally apologize to everybody whose question I cut off. I saw like 5 hands. I think we probably could have been here until about 9 or 10. I see questions that was so informative and so interesting. So thank you so much to Holly for taking the time to come talk to us. For those who are interested, on a somewhat different subject, how many people have heard of ResistBot? Heard of it? How many people have used ResistBot?
Used it today. Go
Oh,
on.
great, wonderful. So for those who are interested, we have someone who has volunteered to give a tutorial on ResistBot. It's a tool that you can use with your phone with text messaging that makes it really, really easy to contact your representatives. So and you can generate a message to them in a few seconds each day. So Susan, would you like to come up and give a little tutorial here?
Well, the ResistBot is actually on Facebook, Twitter, on your phone. They have made it super easy for you to use. Where I started was through texting on my phone. And if anybody has their phone, I can set you up right now.
Okay.
So, let me get the number. Because I don't memorize those numbers, so. Oh, come on. I type weird. Okay. You type in this number. This is where you're sending it. This is the phone number. It's not a complete number. Don't worry about it.
Where do you type it in?
Can you contact?
Two. You're sending
Like
it
a text
to.
message? So it's a text message. This is a text message.
So you're on text message, and you're sending it to 50409. Once you have that, the mess 50409. Once you have that, the message you send is resist. Okay. Now send. You know how it says, "What's your message?"
It doesn't say, then you type in resist.
You type in resist. Just like you do a text message. You type in the number, you type in your message, right?
So it's 504.
09. And then type in, the message you send is resist.
Oh, okay, and then it sends a response back right away.
When you do that, you're gonna get a message within a few seconds. How many have got that message? All right. All you have to do is follow the instructions.
So give us a context. Who is this? What do they do? All
This
that
is a
good
group in San Francisco. It's a San Francisco Indivisible. These are the geek guys who put this together for you to communicate with all of your representatives. It is basically it's free. They do ask for donations. They are upgrading this constantly. I've been using this probably since Trump started office, and I've seen the progression of this particular app. What's beautiful about it is that I get mad, I'm watching TV, I see something that really pisses me off, and we all been there. I just put up ResistBot, and I type in what I want to type in, and it's going to ask me, where do you want to send it? I want to send it to Congress, do I want to send it to Senate, do I want to send it to House, Governor, and so forth. But you need to answer the questions and walk through the whole process, because it'll identify who you are and who your representatives are that you need to communicate with. Okay? You've got to do all of the process. It takes a few seconds.
It's not delivering.
Yes.
I've been using that since the election. My daughter put me into that, and what's great about it is it will format what you write a letter, and it will format it in the letter. It will ask you, do you want a hard copy delivered to
Yes.
your member of Congress or whoever you're writing to?
You can send a
It'll
text.
show it to you, you can edit it, you can see if it's correct, and then they'll show you the final letter. You go, yeah, that's okay. I mean, it's stamped or whatever. So, and there, a hard copy letter or an email letter, whichever you choose, will go to the recipient.
You just follow the instructions. All you need to do is to figure out what you're going to say.
Can you send group emails, group text?
Yeah, I send it to Congress as a blank email sometimes, and obviously mine's Ami Bera, Feinstein, and so I can send it to everybody at once. I can send to something, if I'm particularly upset about something that I think that our governor could do something about, you can actually send the same thing, a message, to him through ResistBot. Every now and then, they'll come up with a new message that will go to a particular representative in the government that's not connected to you. So you get a lot of benefits from this. Now, how many of us can figure out what to say? Okay, well, I'm not one of those. Okay, not always. Sometimes I'm too mad to really put it in words. I just know I'm really pissed off and I want to say something. There's another app. It's called 5 Calls.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know that one.
5 Calls will give you the words. So what you do is you pull it up and you say, I want to do this and this is who I want to send it to. You go to 5 Calls, copy that, paste it into that particular message, and voila.
And
5 Calls is
5 Calls
written out.
is an app.
if you
It's a
picked
phone
up,
app.
if you picked up one of the little quarter sheet things like this
Yes.
that has on it what's coming up this month, on the back, it has issues to be calling about right now. That's taken from 5 Calls.
Right.
And the website's on there, and also on our website, if you go to Daily Actions, 5 Calls is one of the links.
This is the one that, this was just 2 days ago, and you'll notice all the little check marks on there. Those are the ones that I've responded to. Okay, there's one that I haven't that just popped up. It's investigate the NRA ties to Russia. Definitely gonna send that one, okay? So what I use, I probably send on an average 3 to 5 messages a day, to the point that one of the representatives almost knows me by name. We were in Ami Bera's office the other day, and he recognized me just from that. So understand that this works. But the other thing I learned, and I learned this from Camilla Harris's office, was don't send just one message. Send the same message every day. Because they want to know you're still mad. They don't want to think you've just gone away and everything's okay now. They want to know you're still upset and you still are concerned about that particular subject. I have 5 that I send almost daily. DACA, immigration, Trump, okay? And there's, I can't remember, I got them listed. In fact, I just keep them and copy and paste them. Supreme Court, now it's the Supreme Court, and there's always adding one and subtracting the other and then going back to another one. So 5 Calls is a really good way to figure out what to say without having to spend much time on it. So ResistBot, if you want to get it on your phone, it's just a text app. It's by the guys in San Francisco from Indivisible, San Francisco Indivisible, and these guys are really good. I actually have talked to the guy because I use it heavily, and he asked me advice the other day on whether it was good enough, and I said, keep it going, So they really know their stuff. But the most important thing, it's just so easy to send it. I don't send or I don't call anymore. I don't need to, because it goes directly to them.
I'm not really techie. So I've got it on. It says, okay, are you ready to resist?
You say yes.
But right this minute I'm not. So do I have to go through the whole thing
gives
every
them,
time?
gives them information. You don't have to send anything now.
You want
Except, yes, you want that information.
Yeah.
If you're ready to
So
resist,
this-
what they're going to ask is, what's
So
your
they'll be
address,
sending
who
me-
your
yeah, you
name
get all that,
is.
and it's
You
with
have,
me.
right.
But if, like tomorrow, do I have to start all over with the
No.
504?
No, you just type in resist.
Resist,
Whenever
and-
you're ready to speak your
So
mind,
they've got it all
you
there.
type in resist and you begin. And you just follow the instructions. It is that simple.
But they need your demographics to know
Yeah,
who
yeah,
you're.
Yeah.
yeah, I got it right.
But
Yeah,
you put
they
that
did
in
all that.
first.
Yeah, I've got all that.
Okay.
I just didn't
And
know
if
I
you're
had to
on
do it
Twitter,
every single time.
they'll actually tweet your message
Mhm.
to the representative. So what I do is I double whammy. I say, okay, here's my message. You're going to get it by email or whatever form you get it, okay, because they get to them. They'll even tell you they connected.
Mhm.
And then I send it by Twitter, and I actually get a response sometimes. So it actually increases the exposure of the message.
Is your response from Congress bot?
No.
No, there's some lonely intern who gets those and replies to those.
Well,
Probably.
what you learn is they have these checks, and they put a check beside who's mad about what, or who's concerned about what.
And
And
they'll
those,
treat it like an actual letter. Like Kamala Harris actually sent me a letter in the mail in response to something I had sent on ResistBot. So they'll treat it just like as if you had sent them a letter on something.
yes. You will get response occasionally, not all the time. I don't expect it all the time. What I want is I want them to hear my voice. I do not want them to think that I've forgotten about this, that I'm not mad about it because you haven't heard from me. I want them to know that I'm concerned, and I'm consistently concerned, and I want them to take action every day. And the only way that I can do that is if they hear from me. And if they hear from me in a form that I know that they can't avoid, then I got my message. Yes.
My ResistBot switched to Messenger.
Oh, it did.
Part of
If you're
Facebook.
in this room and you're not on the Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
you're subject to having all kinds of problems with your phone right this moment.
Yes.
Don't go with
Right.
that. Don't go
It's
with
an
that.
old building with thick walls, so the cell phone reception isn't amazing here, so that might affect whether you can send things over the phone network right now.
Can you use the ResistBot to send a message to Sessions?
To the Attorney General, I don't
I can handle it.
know.
You have to customize the address.
What's that?
You have to just customize the address.
Oh, you can?
I
You
don't
should be
know.
able to.
They
You could probably send a text to the
Yeah,
resident
no, you don't have a
and
Yeah.
connection.
ask them
Which means
to send,
yeah.
you know,
They'll configure his address. Yeah.
and they'll get it to you
Yeah,
that
you
way.
can do it
I
too.
would, that's what I would do.
Yeah.
You say, I wanna send a text to Sessions, and
Any-
they'll give you,
any
probably
representative,
give you that
yeah.
information back.
Yeah, because I thought it was just limited to our.
I think that's what they've started to do, but I don't see why they wouldn't respond to specific people you wanna send stuff to.
Sure.
All right, how many are on Twitter? Okay, Twitter actually is faster and easier. I know you're gonna think this is crazy, but they just zip. I use it on all four methods, depending on what's available, but know that, you know, you can use this thing super easy. 2 things, ResistBot, and 5 calls, okay?
Thank you so much.
And
I've been
then-
wanting and I just need somebody to walk me through that, so
Okay,
thank you so much.
you're welcome.
If anyone
Sorry.
has any questions, will you be able for a little while?
If you
to-
would like to talk to me or help, have you set it up, just come up and I'll help, okay?
Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Okay, and that wraps up our featured presentations and stuff. Yes.
Before we end, I was going to ask the attorney that was here whether or not we can donate goods, products to these
Oh,
young
okay.
people. And can you send out and say yes or no, we can donate, and maybe we can make an effort?
Pass on to her? Great, okay,
Whether
we
or
will.
not we can, like they requested a blanket.
Right.
We gather up 24 blankets or water, you know, whether they'll take water or whatever.
That's a great idea, if that's something that, I wonder if they're gonna allow that, cause I know if, you can't necessarily send something to someone in like a state prison, but, maybe the federal system, I don't know. So, we'll make sure to ask that question and then,
Or, you
let
know,
everybody know.
Socks, you know.
Socks, blankets, yeah.
See if we, I imagine we could generate a list of things that they need if that's the case, and then we could probably fulfill all of that, right? If there's only 24 in Woodland, so, yes.
Do you know off the top of your head if there is also a center where children are being placed in Rancho Cordova? Because the Unitarian Church is talking about there are small what are they called, children of tender age or whatever, over there. I guess it's one of the markers on that national
Is it?
map.
I knew there was one close to Sacramento, but it was hard to see.
I
That's
think
what it
it's
was.
Rancho Cordova. I'm not positive, so maybe that's something to check out too.
I'll try to find some more. If you haven't had any information on that, please
Okay.
put it on our Facebook page
Okay,
or
sure.
email
Sure.
some of us about that. I don't actually know, but it'd be something to look into.
Thank you.
So, do we have anyone else who wanted to bring anything up before we go today? Okay, well, I want to thank so many people for coming out in a hot summer evening. It was a great meeting tonight. Thank you.